The Mafia boss faked being paralyzed to test his girlfriend but ended up falling for his poor maid. If someone had told Raphael that he would fall in love with the woman who mopped his floors, he would have looked at them the way he looked at everyone who said something foolish, without anger, without expression, just a long, quiet stare that made the other person feel like they had made a very serious mistake. Raphael did not believe in accidents. He did not believe in surprises. He had spent 20 years building a life where everything happened on purpose, where every person in his circle was there because he had chosen them, evaluated them, decided they were useful or loyal or both. Nothing in his world happened without his approval. Not a meeting, not a deal, not a dinner reservation, and certainly not love. So the fact that it happened anyway, that it crept in through a side door he hadn't thought to lock, is the part of this story worth telling. But let's start at the beginning, because before any of this makes sense, you need to understand who Raphael was. And to understand that, you need to understand the world he came from. He grew up watching his father run the city the way other men run a business, with a ledger, with patience, and with a very clear understanding of who owed what to whom. By the time Raphael was 25, his father had passed, and Raphael had stepped into the role so naturally that people who had known the family for decades sometimes forgot there had ever been a transition. He was that seamless, that prepared, that cold, if you want to use the honest word. He was not a cruel man, that is important to say. He did not hurt people for enjoyment. He did not lose his temper, did not raise his voice, did not make dramatic speeches about loyalty and honor, the way men in his position sometimes do. He was quiet. He was precise. He was the kind of person who, when something needed to be handled, handled it, and then went home and ate dinner without thinking about it again. People feared him for exactly that reason. Not because he was loud, because he was not, and for a long time that was enough for him. He had his work, his estate on the edge of the city, his small circle of men he trusted, and a life that ran exactly as he planned it to run. He told himself he was content. Some mornings, he almost believed it. Her name was Vivienne. She came into his life the way beautiful, clever women sometimes do, gradually and then all at once. She was the daughter of a family that had once been very wealthy and was now mostly just very proud. Old name, old address, not much else. She carried herself like someone who had been raised to believe that presentation was everything, and in fairness, she had been raised exactly that way. She was charming. She was attentive. She said the right things at the right moments, laughed at the right moments, was quiet at the right moments. She seemed to understand his world without needing it explained. She never pushed, never pried, never made demands he wasn't ready to meet. Raphael, who was very good at reading people, decided she was genuine. That was his mistake, not a foolish one. Most people would have made the same call with the same information, but a mistake nonetheless. They had been together almost 2 years when the shooting happened. It was a Thursday evening, which felt wrong afterward. Thursdays are ordinary days. Nothing important should happen on a Thursday. Raphael had left a meeting early, which he almost never did, because he had a headache and didn't want to sit across a table from men who talked too much. He took a different car than usual, different driver. On a whim, a different route home. The bullet that was meant for him hit the rear window instead of the back of his head. He survived because of a headache and a change of plans. That was all. The margin between his life and his death was a decision made on instinct, because his temples hurt. He thought about that in the hospital. He thought about it a lot. He was in the hospital for 11 days. The bullet had not hit anything vital, but the impact had rattled something in his spine. Nothing permanent, the doctors said, though he would need a week in bed and then careful movement. He would walk again without any problem. He would be completely fine. Vivienne came to the hospital the moment she heard. She was there when he woke up, sitting in the chair beside his bed, her hand on his arm, her face arranged in exactly the expression you would expect from a devoted partner who had nearly lost someone they loved. She cried. She held his hand. She spoke to the doctors in hushed, worried tones. She called his men to give them updates. She barely left the room, and Raphael, lying in that bed, watched all of it. He watched the way she cried, only when someone walked into the room. He watched the way she stopped, quickly and completely, when they left, the way an actress stops performing when the director calls cut. He watched her check her phone 17 times in a single afternoon while thinking he was asleep. He watched her face when she thought no one was looking, and what he saw there was not grief. It was calculation, the quiet arithmetic of someone who is working out what things look like now and what they might look like next. Raphael was a man who had built his entire life on reading people correctly. He had survived 20 years in a world where misreading someone could get you killed. He knew what genuine distress looked like. He knew what performed distress looked like. He said nothing. He held her hand when she offered it. He thanked her for being there. He let her fuss over his pillows and his medication schedule, and his calls, and inside, very quietly, he began to make a plan. There is a particular kind of pain that has nothing to do with bullets or hospitals. It is the pain of suspecting that someone you trusted is not who you thought they were, and not knowing for certain, because suspicion is not proof, and a man like Raphael did not move on suspicion. He moved on facts. He needed facts. And to get them, he needed time. And to get time, he needed a reason for the world around him to slow down and reveal itself. So he made a decision. He called in his most trusted man, a quiet, serious person named Dante, who had been with the family for 15 years and who knew how to keep a secret the way a vault knows how to keep money. He also called the family doctor, a careful man named Dr. Ferreira, who had treated the Moretti family for a decade and who owed Raphael more than one favor. The conversation was short. The plan was simple. When Raphael returned home from the hospital, he would be in a wheelchair. The story, carefully spread through the household and beyond, would be that the injury to his spine was more serious than first reported, that he had lost the use of his legs, that the prognosis was uncertain. He would not be faking an injury for sympathy. He was not that kind of man. He was faking it for information, because there is no faster way to find out what someone truly thinks of you than to make them believe you are no longer powerful. Take away a man's strength, his control, his ability to walk into a room and command it, and watch what the people around him do next. Watch who stays, watch who leaves. Watch what they say when they think you cannot hear them. Watch who reaches for things they would never reach for if you were standing. Dante thought it was a calculated risk. Dr. Ferreira thought it was madness. Raphael thought it was necessary. The plan began. The drive home from the hospital was quiet. Raphael sat in the back of the car, watching the city pass outside the window, and said almost nothing the entire journey. Dante sat across from him, also quiet, which was one of the things Raphael had always appreciated about Dante. He understood when silence was more useful than words. The estate looked the same as it always did. The gates, the long driveway, the house itself, a large, serious building that had never quite decided whether it wanted to be warm or imposing, and had settled for both. The staff was lined up outside the entrance in the way they always were when Raphael returned from a trip, a habit his father had started, and no one had thought to stop. They watched him being helped from the car into the wheelchair, with careful, neutral faces. Staff in houses like this are trained to show very little, but Raphael knew how to read even small things. He saw the shift in a few eyes, the ones who were genuinely worried, the ones who were not sure what this meant for them, the ones who were simply waiting to understand what the new normal looked like. And then there was her. She was standing at the far end of the line, near the door. The new maid, hired 6 months ago, around the time of a household expansion that Raphael had barely paid attention to. He had approved the hire the way he approved most domestic decisions, quickly, without much interest, trusting that Dante had checked the references and that the person was competent. Her name was Nadia. She was 27, dark-haired, small in a way that made her look young until you saw her eyes, which were calm and direct and much older than her face. She was from a small town 3 hours from the city. Her father had worked for the Moretti family years ago as a groundskeeper, before Raphael's time. He had passed away 2 years before, leaving debts that Nadia was still slowly, quietly paying off. Raphael did not know any of this yet. At that moment, he knew only what he saw, A woman standing very still in a line of people who were watching him with varying degrees of anxiety, who was not watching him with anxiety at all. She was watching him the way you watch someone carry a heavy bag up a flight of stairs, with attention in case they need a hand, but without drama. He was wheeled past her without a word, but he noticed. Vivienne had transformed his bedroom into something between a luxury hotel suite and a hospital recovery room. There was a new, lower bed, rails in the bathroom, a medication schedule on the nightstand, fresh flowers, the expensive kind, on every surface. She had clearly put thought and time and money into it, and she told him so, gently, as she helped him get settled. He thanked her. He meant it, in a technical sense. He was thanking the performance. She sat with him for most of that first evening, talking softly about small things. The garden, a film she had watched, a friend's upcoming wedding. It was pleasant. It was careful. It was the kind of conversation you have with someone when you are being very deliberate about not having a different conversation. When she finally left to sleep, Raphael lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He was not sad, exactly. He was something harder to name than sad. He was a man who had suspected something true, had seen enough to confirm it, and was now in the process of building a wall around that knowledge, so it would not make him do something imprecise. He was very good at building walls. The household settled into a new routine within a few days. Vivienne managed his schedule, his social calls, the communication with his business associates. She was in her element doing this. Organized, polished, handling everything with a smooth efficiency that would have impressed Raphael if he had not started watching the spaces between the efficiency. The staff rotated through his care in shifts. Someone brought meals. Someone managed his medications. Someone kept the room clean. Nadia was assigned to the morning shift. She brought breakfast, managed the room, ensured his basic schedule was running. She was quiet about it. She did not hover. She came in, did what needed doing, and left without requiring anything from him. Not conversation, not acknowledgement, not gratitude. Most people, when they are near someone powerful who has been weakened, do one of two things. They either try to take advantage of the situation in small ways, being a little lazier, a little more careless, or they overcompensate with attention and fussiness, trying to demonstrate how essential they are, how caring, how irreplaceable. Nadia did neither. She treated him, from the first day, exactly as she would have treated anyone else in that room. Not with disrespect, not casually, but without the particular kind of performance that people put on around power. She was simply present, simply competent, simply herself. It was the strangest thing Raphael had encountered in years, and he was not sure what to do with it. On the fourth morning, she brought his breakfast, and he was reading, or pretending to, which he had decided was a useful thing to do while actually watching the room. She set the tray on the table without a word, began straightening the things on the far side of the room. He said without looking up from the book, "How do you take your coffee?" She stopped, looked at him, clearly not expecting to be asked anything. "Milk," she said. "No sugar." He nodded once and went back to the book. The next morning, there was a second cup on her cart. He said nothing about it. She said nothing about it. But she paused, just briefly, when she saw it, just long enough that he noticed, even from across the room. He did not examine why he had done it. He filed it away under things he would think about later and turned the page. Vivienne's performance started showing its seams around the 2-week mark. It was not one big thing. It was many small things, each individually explainable, each individually reasonable. But when you arranged them next to each other, the picture they made was very clear. She started leaving the estate more. Gallery events, she said. Lunches with friends. An appointment she had forgotten, another that had come up suddenly. She always returned before evening, always with a reason that held together on its surface. She was not stupid. She was never careless enough to give him something obvious. But she started having phone calls she took in the garden. Not all of them, not obviously, but some. And the garden had a window directly above it, a second-floor room that Raphael had started using, quietly, for the simple reason that he could stand up and walk there without anyone knowing, since he was very careful about when and how he moved through the house. He was not fully mobile yet. The injury, while not as bad as he had claimed, still needed time. But he could stand. He could walk carefully. He was nowhere near as helpless as he appeared. He stood at that window on a Tuesday afternoon and listened. He could not hear everything. Fragments, mostly. Her voice dropping low. The tone of someone who is measuring their words. A name he did not recognize. The phrase "before things change," spoken twice, in two different ways, which told him it was the center of what was being said. And then a laugh, quick and private, the kind you only hear from someone who is completely relaxed, because they believe no one who matters is listening. He moved away from the window before she came back inside. He sat in his chair and picked up the book again. His hands were very still. They always went very still when he had decided something. He started noticing things about Nadia the same way he had started noticing things about Vivienne, through accumulation rather than any single moment. She guessed his reading tastes from the spines of the books in his library and started leaving one on his breakfast tray every few days. She got it right most of the time. When she didn't, when she left something too light, too simple, she admitted it directly the next morning, without making a thing of it. "I misjudged that one," she said, nodding at the book she was collecting from his nightstand. "I thought you liked clean endings. But I think you actually like the ones where something costs something." Raphael looked at her for a moment. Then, yes. She nodded and put the book on her cart. No elaboration, no follow-up questions. Just a nod, and then she was back to her work. He sat with that exchange for the rest of the day. Not because it was remarkable. It was a small thing, a quiet observation, but because no one had said something like that to him in a very long time, maybe ever. The people in his world talked about him in terms of what he did, what he wanted, what he controlled. They did not make quiet guesses about what kind of stories he read and whether the guesses were right. They started talking more. Not much, not in any deliberate way, just the occasional exchange when she was in the room, and one of them said something and the other answered, and then a little more, and a little more. It had a natural quality to it, the way water finds its way downhill without being directed. He found out about her father in pieces, that he had worked for the estate years ago, that he had been a careful, proud man who would never have wanted anyone to know about the financial trouble he left behind, that Nadia was paying off the debts without telling the people she owed what a sacrifice it was, because her father would not have wanted that, and honoring him meant honoring the way he carried himself even after he was gone. Raphael said nothing when she told him these things. He was not a man who said much when something moved him, but he remembered every word. She found out about him in pieces too, though she did not know it. She found out that he was not sleeping. She could tell by the way the bed looked in the mornings. She found out that he drank his coffee before it cooled, every time, which meant he was always somewhere else in his head and drinking on autopilot. She found out that he never left music on, but that he sometimes sat very still in a way that suggested he was listening to something only he could hear. She did not ask about any of it. She just paid attention, and for Raphael, who had spent 2 decades surrounded by people who paid attention only to what they could use, being simply observed was a strange and unfamiliar feeling. He was not sure at first whether he liked it. Then he was. Dante found him standing at the second-floor window one night, 3 weeks into the arrangement. It was past midnight. The house was dark. Raphael was not in his wheelchair. Dante stopped in the doorway and looked at him for a moment. He had the patience of a man who had waited in a lot of doorways for a lot of reasons, and he was willing to wait now. "What are you doing?" he finally asked. "Thinking," Raphael said, without turning from the window. "About?" A pause. The kind that has an answer in it, even if the answer isn't said out loud. Dante crossed his arms. He knew this man the way you know someone after 15 years of working alongside them. Not perfectly, because no one knows anyone perfectly, but in the particular way of someone who has watched them in every kind of pressure and weather. He knew when Raphael's silences meant nothing, and when they meant something significant. This one meant something significant. "She is not the kind of person who fits into this," Dante said carefully. He did not say who he meant. He did not need to. Raphael turned from the window, looked at him. "No," he said, "she is not." Dante waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. Raphael moved back toward the hall, and Dante stepped aside to let him pass, and neither of them said anything else that night. But Dante walked back to his own room, thinking that after 20 years of watching Raphael Moretti manage everything with absolute precision, something had finally gotten past the wall. And he was not sure whether to be glad about it or afraid. He settled for both. Raphael had designed the trap 3 weeks into the arrangement, and he waited another week before setting it. It was a document. Specifically, a legal document that appeared to give Vivienne temporary authority over several financial accounts, the kind of authority that, in the hands of someone who knew what they were doing, could do a great deal of damage or a great deal of good, depending entirely on the intentions of the person holding it. The document was false, constructed carefully enough to appear real to anyone who was not a lawyer, and Vivienne was not a lawyer. It was left, seemingly accidentally, in a folder on his desk during a morning when Raphael was being helped to his bath and Vivienne had the room to herself for 20 minutes. Dante was watching through the security feed in a room down the hall. She found the folder within 8 minutes. She read it. She photographed it. She put it back exactly where she found it, carefully, precisely, in the exact position it had been, which told Raphael something about her that he already knew. She was thorough, she was disciplined, and she had done this kind of thing before. The photograph reached a lawyer connected to a rival family within 48 hours. Dante brought the information to Raphael on a Wednesday morning. He laid it out plainly, the way he always did. No embellishment, no interpretation, just the facts in order. Raphael listened without interruption. He looked at the information Dante had gathered. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Ask her to come to the study this evening." She came dressed beautifully. She always did. She sat across from him with the posture of someone who had been raised to take up exactly the right amount of space, not too little, not too much, and looked at him with the open, gentle expression she had been wearing for 2 years. He told her what he knew. Not dramatically, not angrily. He laid it out the way he laid everything out, plainly, in order, without raising his voice. The phone calls, the photograph, the lawyer, what the lawyer's connection meant, what her connection to that family meant. She went through stages. He watched them happen almost clinically. Surprise first, then the calculation behind the surprise, then a version of the truth that was shaped to minimize damage, then, when she saw that he was not buying it, a kind of cold, stripped-back honesty that he actually found more respectable than the rest. "You were never going to stay paralyzed forever," she said finally. "I was protecting myself." "From what?" he asked. She didn't answer, which was an answer. He told her that her things would be packed and arranged for collection within the day, that his lawyer would be in touch regarding the end of their arrangement, that he wished her clarity about what she was actually looking for, because the performance she had been giving was a great deal of effort and she deserved to direct that effort at something that would actually make her happy. She left without making a scene. He had expected that. She was too controlled, too aware of how things looked, to make a scene. The door closed. The room was very quiet. He had been right. He had suspected correctly, confirmed correctly, handled it correctly. Everything had gone exactly as planned. He sat in the silence for a long time, feeling none of the satisfaction that being right usually carried. The house felt different the next morning. Quieter, lighter, in the way that rooms feel lighter when something heavy has been removed from them, even if no one says out loud that they are relieved. The staff knew something had happened. Staff always know. They had seen Vivienne's car leave the previous night, had seen the careful faces of the men carrying bags. They said nothing, which was the correct thing to do. Nadia came in with his breakfast as usual. She did not look around for Vivienne. She did not ask where she was. She set the tray down, moved to the window, opened the curtains to let in the gray morning light, and turned to check if there was anything else he needed. That was when she noticed the wheelchair was not in its usual place by the bed. It was folded against the far wall, where it had not been yesterday morning. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him, sitting at the desk in a regular chair, both feet on the floor, in a posture that a paralyzed man would not be able to manage. She was quiet for a moment. Then, how long? He looked up from the desk. He could have deflected. He could have offered an explanation that didn't fully answer the question. He was very good at both of those things. He didn't. From the beginning, he said. She absorbed this. She was not angry, or if she was, she held it the way she held most things, without showing the full weight of it. She was processing. He could see her working through what it meant, what had actually been happening around her for the past 4 weeks. "Who were you testing?" she asked. He said nothing, but he looked at her, and the look was enough. She nodded once, slowly. Then she turned toward the door. "Nadia." She stopped. He had never used her name before. She was always simply the maid, or sometimes simply nothing, an unnamed presence in his day. The name, in his voice, with the particular weight he put on it, stopped her more completely than a shout would have. She turned back. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the deception. You were not involved in it, but you were part of the world it was running inside of, and that was not fair to you." It was possibly the most honest sentence he had said out loud in 3 years, maybe longer. She looked at him for a moment with those direct, calm eyes. Then she nodded once more and left. After she was gone, he sat at the desk and did not move for almost an hour. He thought about Vivienne, not with anger, not anymore, more with the dull, factual acceptance of a man who has confirmed something he already knew. That chapter was closed. What surprised him was how little he felt about it. He had expected something more, some grief, maybe, some regret. Instead, there was only the quiet of a room after a decision has been made. What he could not stop thinking about was Nadia. Specifically, he could not stop thinking about the gap between what he had spent 4 weeks looking for and what he had found by accident. He had set up a test to reveal one woman's true character, and in the process had been quietly undone by another woman's character, which had never been hidden or performed at all. It had simply been there, every morning, setting down a breakfast tray. He thought about the coffee she took with milk and no sugar. He thought about the book she had left on his tray that was wrong, and the simple, unembarrassed honesty with which she had acknowledged the miss. He thought about her telling him about her father without ever asking for pity, without shaping the story to make herself look like a martyr, without even, he suspected, thinking of herself as one. He thought about the fact that she had known, somehow, not the details, but something, and had asked him directly. No games, no careful positioning, just how long. He picked up the phone, called a contact in the city's legal and financial district, gave instructions to trace and settle the remaining Reyes family debts, quietly, completely, without his name attached to it. He was told it would take a few days to arrange. He said that was fine. He put the phone down and sat with the strange unfamiliarity of having done something for which he expected nothing in return. The complication arrived the following week. His name was Nico, Nadia's younger brother, 19, studying engineering at the city university on a scholarship that barely covered his tuition and left nothing for food or rent. He showed up at the service entrance on a Thursday morning looking for his sister, and something in the urgency of his presence made the staff bring him inside rather than turn him away. Nadia found him in the kitchen. He was trying to be calm and not managing it. He told her in a low, hurried voice what had happened. A man had approached him outside his university. Quiet, well-dressed, nothing threatening about the approach, which was exactly why it was threatening. He had offered Nico money, significant money, for information about the Moretti household, what the schedule was, who came and went, whether things had really changed after the accident, or whether that was a story being told for other reasons. Nico had said no and walked away, but he had been frightened enough to come straight here rather than call. Nadia listened to all of this. Then she went directly to Raphael. She did not weigh her options. She did not calculate what disclosing this would mean for her position here, or whether it might put her family in a difficult position, or whether it was even really her business to get involved. She simply went to him because it was the right thing to do, and that was the kind of person she was. He recognized the description of the man immediately. He had a name for it within an hour, through channels that he was better at using than anyone in the city. The approach to Nico was connected to the rival family that Vivienne had been communicating with. A loose thread, testing to see if the fabric had weakened. The matter was handled in 2 days, quietly, as always, efficiently, as always. The loose thread was tied off. The pressure stopped. Then Raphael called Dante and gave him a second set of instructions. He arranged for Nico to be offered a legitimate position with one of the construction companies the Moretti family held a stake in. A real position, with a real salary, the kind that would cover his tuition and his rent and a little beyond. The university fees were also quietly taken care of, through the same channels that had taken care of the family debts. No announcement, no fanfare, simply a situation that was now better than it had been. Nadia found out the following afternoon. She came to the study, not to do anything, not because she was scheduled to be there. She simply appeared in the doorway and stood there for a moment, and when he looked up, the expression on her face was something he had not seen directed at him in a very long time. It was not gratitude exactly. It was something more complicated than gratitude. It was the look of someone who had expected one thing from the world and received another, and was trying to figure out what that meant. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," he agreed. "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment. He thought about giving her something careful, something measured. He had 100 ways to say things without actually saying them. He had used them all his life. He said, "Because you have been carrying things by yourself for a long time. And someone should have helped before now." She stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then she stepped inside, set something on the edge of his desk, a book, the next one she had picked for him, and left without another word. He sat looking at the book for a while before he picked it up. Things were different after that, and also the same, and the combination of different and same was the particular kind of tension that neither of them knew how to navigate cleanly. She was still doing her job. He was still doing his. The morning routine continued. The coffee, the books, the quiet presence in the room while work happened around it. But something had shifted in the way they occupied space around each other, a kind of awareness, mutual and unspoken, that had not been there before, or had been there maybe for a while, and was only now impossible to pretend wasn't. He asked her questions now, properly, not to fill silence but because he wanted to know. He asked what she had studied before leaving school to pay her father's debts. She had been studying literature, 2 years in, nearly finished her degree. She had left without drama, without complaint, the way she did most things. She had simply looked at the numbers and made the practical decision. "Do you miss it?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "I miss the reading. I was doing that anyway. I miss the conversations about the reading. Those are harder to find." He said nothing to that, but that evening he asked Dante to look into whether there was a way to arrange for her to complete her degree remotely without her knowing it was being arranged. Dante looked at him for a moment, then said, "This is getting complicated." "I know," Raphael said. "Are we acknowledging that?" "I'm acknowledging it now." Dante nodded slowly, made a note, and went to find out about the degree program. He did not say what he was thinking, which was that he had known this man for 15 years, and this was the first time he had ever seen him want something that had nothing to do with power or protection. She asked him the hard question on a rainy Tuesday evening when she had stayed longer than necessary after bringing dinner. She was by the window, watching the rain on the glass, and he was at his desk not really working, and the room was quiet in the easy way it had become quiet between them. Not uncomfortable, not awkward, just two people in the same space without needing to perform being there. She said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Do you think it was worth it? The life you built? All of it?" He put down his pen. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked out the same window, at the same rain. It was the kind of question that required a real answer, or no answer, and he had spent 20 years giving neither, giving instead something that sounded like an answer but wasn't, something smooth and practiced, that closed the door before anyone could get through it. He said, after a long silence, "I don't know anymore. And I didn't think I'd ever say that." She turned from the window and looked at him. "That sounds like progress," she said. "Maybe." She stayed another hour. They talked about other things after that. Her father, his city, a book she had left on his desk, that he had read in 2 days. But the first part sat in the room with them like something that had been set down and could not be picked back up again, which was fine. Some things should not be picked back up. The job offer came from the north side of the city. A wealthy family, old money, legitimate, the kind that hired quietly and paid well, was looking for a personal assistant, someone with good instincts, practical intelligence, a calm manner. The salary was almost twice what she was earning. The hours were regular. The environment was simple. It reached her through a contact who had nothing to do with Raphael, and it was genuine. He found out about it through Dante, who learned about most things. Dante brought it up in the way he brought up difficult things, carefully, watching Raphael's face as he spoke, ready to stop and adjust depending on what he saw there. Raphael's face showed nothing. He said, "When does she need to decide?" "End of the week." He nodded, said nothing else. He sat with it for 24 hours. He thought about his options, which was a habit, cataloging what he could do, what he could arrange, what pressure he could apply. He had the ability to make the offer disappear, to make the alternative less appealing, to find a quiet way to tip the scales. He could do all of these things. He did none of them. It was, he decided, possibly the hardest thing he had done in a very long time, harder than the surgery, harder than the months in hospitals after other incidents in other years, harder than watching Vivienne perform her grief and saying nothing. All of those things had required control. This required giving it up, and for Raphael, those were very different exercises. She came to him on a Thursday morning, before breakfast, while the house was still quiet. She had the letter in her hand. She stood in the doorway in the way she had started standing in doorways, not tentative, not aggressive, just present, waiting to be invited into whatever was about to happen. He nodded her in. She sat down, not in the formal chair across the desk, but in the chair to the side, which was a small thing but not a small thing. She set the letter on her knee. She looked at him. "I need to ask you directly," she said, "not around it. Go ahead. If I leave, will your world follow me? Will this, all of this, reach into wherever I go next?" He understood the question exactly. It was not a paranoid question. It was a sensible one, from a woman who had seen enough of his world to understand what its reach looked like. "No," he said. "If you go, it stops at the gate. You have my word." She looked at him for a moment. She was deciding whether she believed him. He could see it, the assessment happening behind her eyes, direct and careful and honest. She nodded. She believed him. Then, "Do you want me to go?" The question sat in the air between them. He was, at his core, a man who had built everything in his life on controlling what information he gave and when he gave it, on never exposing a position before it was necessary, on keeping his own needs invisible so they could not be used against him. He looked at her, at this woman who had carried her life without complaint, who had treated him like a person when he was pretending to be broken, who had told him the truth when she had information she didn't have to share, who had never once tried to use him for anything at all. He said, "No, but I think the more important question is what you want." She sat with that for a moment. Then she looked down at the letter on her knee and back up at him. "I've been thinking about that," she said. "For 2 days, actually." "And?" She was quiet for a moment more. Then she put the letter on the desk. "I'll stay," she said. "But not as your maid." He looked at the letter on his desk, then at her. "What then?" She gave a small, almost smile. "I haven't figured that out yet. I thought we'd work on that part." He was quiet. Then something happened in his face that Dante, had he been in the room, would have found completely unprecedented. Something that was almost, nearly, not quite but close to, a smile. "All right," he said. What changed after that was not everything, and it was not nothing. His world did not become safer because his guard came down. It did not become simpler because he had chosen something real for once. The men he answered to were still the same men. The city was still the same city. The ledger he kept, the careful accounting of favors and threats and long-standing arrangements, still required tending. But the decisions he made started being different. 2 contracts he would have taken without thinking, he passed on. Both had clean money attached and dirty outcomes, and he had accepted that trade-off for 20 years. but now he looked at it differently. He could not explain why, precisely. He did not try to. He simply declined. He started going to bed at a reasonable hour. He started eating dinner at the table instead of at the desk. Small things. The kind of small things that you don't notice until you're doing them, and then you notice, and you don't stop. Nadia finished her degree 18 months later, through a program she had discovered, she told him, that allowed her to complete her remaining credits remotely. She seemed pleased but not surprised, which made him think she had suspected the program was not entirely self-discovered. He said nothing about it. She looked at him for a moment with those calm, direct eyes, and said, "Thank you." He looked back at her. For what? For not making me ask. He held her gaze, then looked back at the document he was reading, but he was not reading it anymore. Nico graduated the following spring. He came to the house for dinner to celebrate, nervous in the way young people are nervous around serious older men, unsure whether he was allowed to relax. Raphael spoke to him for about 10 minutes, not about anything in particular, just the program, the city, what came next. After Nico left, Nadia found Raphael in the study. "He was terrified of you," she said. "He was polite. He was polite and terrified. They are not mutually exclusive." A pause. Then, from Raphael, "Will he be all right?" She looked at him for a moment. The question, the genuine, unguarded, simply human question of whether a young man he barely knew would be all right, sat in the air between them like evidence. "Yes," she said. "He'll be fine." "Good." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, you are not actually as terrifying as you think you are." He looked up. She was half smiling, which was as close to teasing as she usually got. "That is a very dangerous thing to say." "I know. I said it anyway." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he went back to his papers, which he was still not reading. The last thing to say about Raphael is what he looked like on an ordinary morning, a year and a half after the wheelchair was folded against the wall for the last time. He was standing at the window in his study, the same window he had stood at 100 times before, watching the city below. The city had not changed. The morning light was the same light it always was. The sounds from the street were the usual sounds. But he was not watching the city the way he used to. He used to stand at that window like a man surveying territory, like a man taking inventory of what belonged to him. Now he just watched it. The way you watch something you have decided to stop trying to own. He could hear Nadia in the next room. She was on the phone with Nico, laughing at something he had said. It was a real laugh, the kind that doesn't manage its volume or its timing, the kind that simply happens because something was funny. It was the most ordinary sound. It was the best sound he had heard in longer than he could remember. He stood at the window and listened to her laugh, and the precise, careful, stone-by-stone architecture of the person he had built himself into over 20 years, the walls and the silences and the performance of a man who needed nothing from anyone, shifted, just slightly, the way a house settles, not collapses. He had gone into this whole thing looking to expose a lie. He had not expected to find something true. He had not planned for it, had not engineered it, had not chosen it, had not approved it in advance. It had simply happened, through morning coffee and honest book recommendations, and a woman who walked into rooms without needing to perform walking into them. And Raphael, who had controlled everything for 20 years, who had never been surprised, who had built an entire life on the premise that he could manage every outcome if he was careful enough, had been surprised. He almost smiled.